Welcome back to the dungeon! We're just getting ready to start the second floor of our big 100 floor dungeon with a focus on demonstrating combat and perhaps a little bit of stealth. If you're coming in fresh to this series, I recommend checking the previous videos to get a full context on building this dungeon from scratch. In the last video, I spent a good chunk of time explaining the specifics of each challenge I set up for the players and explained how that challenge serves to teach some D&D rules to the players in a sort of controlled environment. In this video, I want to do a bit more of a brief summary of the floor and spend more time actually explaining the way you handle each floor's challenges and the special rules for the peeps out there that might not have read the quick rules yet. To summarize the vast majority of challenges in the first floor, you're going to be using a d20 or 20-sided dice. Anytime you need to roll, the challenge determines what kind of check you're doing, which impacts any bonuses or penalties you add to the number you get on the d20. For example, one of the first things a player might do in the first floor is an investigation check. If the player has advantage or disadvantage on their check, they'll roll the dice twice, taking the better roll with advantage or the worse roll with disadvantage. Then add the number listed on the investigation in their character sheet, and if the final number matches or exceeds the difficulty class, the player succeeds. Otherwise, the player either fails or there is some complication. The DC is either flat or based on an imposing check, such as a contest, and depending on the nature of the task, succeeding by a lot or failing by a lot can cause more drastic consequences. Almost everything the players do on the first floor is based on that premise, but in the second floor, there are a lot more rules and stats to worry about for handling combat and stealth. When timing starts to matter a lot and the sequence of player events becomes more important, it's time to say the DM's catchphrase, roll for initiative. This is usually required only for combat, but I like to also use initiative in scenarios where a lot of players want to act at once and then the order between the players and any enemies in the area start to matter, such as during a big stealth sequence. In any case, when you decide it's appropriate to use initiative, everyone, including enemies in the area, even enemies the players might not be aware of, rolls a d20 and adds their initiative bonus, usually just their dexterity modifier. You don't need to list the enemies the players are unaware of, and I'd suggest keeping track of their turns in secret. Players beat enemies in initiative ties, and each round of initiative involves all characters doing a turn in the initiative order. Each round allows you to do 5 things, 4 of which is only on your specific turn. First is an action, where you get to do some major activity, like an attack, an involved search, or breaking into a dash. Second is movement, which means you can move up to your speed over the course of your turn. Any activity can be done in between movements as long as your total movement doesn't exceed your speed. For players, their speed is usually 30 feet or 6 squares, and diagonal movement is still only 1 square each. Third is a bonus action, which is usually some quick special activity that your race or class features give you. And finally, on your turn, you have a sort of interaction, which is just you manipulating the environment in some small way. For example, drawing a weapon or opening an unlocked door. Once per round, you also get a reaction, which is something you do in response to something else happening, and it can be done on someone else's turn. Making an opportunity attack when someone runs away from you, or casting a counter spell are examples of reactions. And all 5 of these things you can do, including the reaction refresh, when your turn starts again. This is demonstrated by the primary themes and challenges in the second floor. The players would start by encountering 2 goblins, busy searching through their latest mining spoils. Whether the players sneak past or ambush them, the following section is a long hallway that includes 1 goblin guarding their boss's chambers, and another goblin guarding and trapping giant crabs in a lake to the south. Finally, a pair of goblins scout the intersections of the hallway from a central arena, and the boss of the goblins is training inside the arena. It's a good idea to have a good understanding of what the goblins might be doing in scenarios where they are either aware of the player's presence or not. For example, the goblin guarding the boss's chambers would probably stay still, while the goblin in the lake would try to catch crabs in a net if they are unaware. Once they are alerted to the player's presence, the goblin guarding the boss's door might go alert the boss himself, while the goblin dealing with the crabs might instead patrol the hallway, looking for the players. It'll also be important to figure out what the various enemies would do in a combat situation. Because of their nimble escape ability, goblins might typically disengage from melee, preferring to fight from a distance. The giant crabs, having been hunted by goblins prior, might be overtly aggressive to the goblins, but otherwise indifferent towards the players unless provoked. Savvy players can use this to their advantage by freeing the trapped crabs in the southwest room. But I'm digressing here. Back to the important rules. In combat, the most common action someone's going to do is to attack someone or something else. Whenever that attack happens, the attacker rolls a d20 and adds the appropriate attack bonus, trying to match or exceed the target's armor class or AC. You can think of it like a skill check, except the skill check is using a certain weapon and the difficulty is based on the target's armor class. On a success, the attacker would then also get to perform a damage roll, which is a special roll that uses different dice and bonuses based on the kind of attack. A dagger attack, for example, would roll a 4-sided dice, while a massive greatsword attack would roll 2 6-sided dice, or 2d6 for short. A special note for attacks is that they can critically hit or miss based on the result of the 20-sided dice before adding any bonuses. If you roll exactly 20 on a d20, or a natural 20, you critically hit, meaning that you always hit the target even if your attack is lower than the target's AC, and the dice you would roll for the damage get doubled. 2d4 for a dagger or 4d6 for a greatsword. If you roll exactly 1 on a d20 or a natural 1, you automatically miss the attack, even if your attack score matches or exceeds the target's armor class. Attacking is the most common action, but there are plenty of other actions that can be useful. To name some examples that will be relevant to this floor, dashing allows you to move up to your speed an additional time during your turn, effectively doubling your speed. Helping allows you to grant an ally advantage on their next attack or ability check. Disengaging allows you to ignore opportunity attacks during your turn, and dodging gives any enemies that you can see disadvantage when attacking you until your next turn. Just keep in mind that in most scenarios, using one of these actions replaces your typical attack action for that turn. The goblin's ability to disengage or hide as a bonus action bypasses this rule. Now, if your players prefer a stealthy approach, the rules for 5th edition get sort of complicated. A lot of DMs will conflict on how they like to handle stealth challenges, so rather than recite all the specific rules with their somewhat vague tendencies, I'll deviate a bit from reading rules as written and just explain how I like to handle stealth challenges. First, I'll have each player perform a stealth check and track their score, which I like to call a passive stealth score. Passive stealth scores that beat the enemy's passive perception, in this case, stealth scores of 10 or better for the goblins, indicate that the player can avoid detection as long as they have some form of cover or darkness. Keep in mind that goblins see dim light up to 60 feet away as bright light, and that giant crabs have 30 feet of blind sight, which they treat as bright light no matter what. If your passive stealth score does not beat the enemy's passive perception, that means you need total darkness or full cover to avoid detection. In any case, players also need to roll a new stealth check whenever they move more than half their speed in a single turn, and that check is at disadvantage if they dashed. This check is to avoid being heard, and it doesn't replace your passive stealth score. If an enemy is actively searching and the player stops having proper cover or darkness, an enemy may be granted an active perception check to beat the player's passive stealth score on their turn. They might also get this check if an external source removed the player's cover or darkness outside of the opponent's turn, such as if a player with a torch accidentally shines a light on a player who's hiding. Finally, a player that's proficient with stealth can spend an action to help the player next to them, allowing them to re-roll their passive stealth score, but they take the second score even if it's lower. However, the helped player can't get a passive stealth score higher than the player that's helping them. A player can only be helped this way once per round, and a player can only help each other player this way once during the encounter. And obviously they can only help a player with a lower stealth score than them. In scenarios of an ambush, hidden players have advantage when attacking an enemy. If the attack hits, in addition to its damage, the enemy becomes surprised. Surprised creatures effectively skip their first turn. If a non-surprised creature gets attacked and the attack misses, or if a surprised creature ends their turn and is no longer surprised, they'll typically scream for help and alert their nearby allies. In essence, when ambushing a creature from stealth, the first attack needs to hit, and the team should work together to knock out the creature before their surprise wears off. That's a lot to explain shortly in terms of how I run stealth, but the core to understand is that you want to roll a stealth check and compare it to either the enemy's passive perception or an enemy's active perception if they are actively searching. The exact details of how this works is very much up to interpretation. The last things I want to cover about this floor are the special items and the secret room. The special items in this floor are the nets and the potions in the armory. Nets don't do damage when you hit with them, but instead restrain a target caught in one. Nets require a DC 10 strength check to escape, or if another player can deal 5 slashing damage, they can destroy the net. Make sure to check what kind of damage your weapon does before trying to chop down a net with a hammer. The potions can end up doing fire, acid, or poison damage respectively. Keep in mind the poison resistance and acid vulnerability the goblin boss has, which halves or doubles damage respectively. There are also healing potions that can heal someone outside of resting as an action. Finally, the secret room near the end of the dungeon stores an unsocketed ring of resistance, and a well-aware player might investigate and naturally discover the room, or a thoroughly defeated goblin boss might be convinced or coerced to reveal the secret room's location. The players can either take a purple crystal to create a ring of resist poison, or find an appropriately colored gem in town to buy to create a different resistance. Keep in mind that once socketed, the ring's resistance type is permanent. I hope this has been a bit more helpful in terms of reviewing the actual rules that go into a D&D challenge. As more challenges are presented to the players and more nasties need fighting, the rules of combat and checks will begin to become second nature, leading the way to more advanced challenges and more nuanced rules. As before, the D&D dungeon poll is still up on my Twitter to share your feedback on where you want to move this dungeon next. But I've also set up a Q&A poll for any specifics on the D&D rules, or just curiosities you might have about TTRPGs in general and my experiences with the game and hobby. I'm looking forward to what you have in mind for this dungeon's future, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have in future streams or videos. Until then, I'll be seeing you as we explore the third floor.